Live. Well, good evening, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us for our CALIPER Forum. I think we have a pretty interesting topic here this evening. As many of you know, that our Virginia delegates have changed a lot of laws in policing. Some you may be familiar with, some you may not be familiar with. But our goal here this evening is to discuss those things and see how that changes policing, within the town of Warrenton and also within Fauquier County. And as it pertains to us as Caliber, one of the ways that we achieve equality and reconciliation is understanding all sides of the story. So if we understand the law, then we understand what the police are doing. And if the police are understanding what the citizens are or how they're interpreting these things, then the police themselves know how to deal with the populace. So we encourage you to submit your questions and your comments. We're not here to debate the validity of the laws. The laws are in place. Whether we like them or not is irrelevant. We just want to discuss them as they are and how that's going to affect us either as citizens or as law enforcement. So we have, I believe, a good panel here tonight to have this discussion. I think we have all vested interest at the table, and that would include you who are joining us virtually. So I'm going to go around the horn as it is laid out on my screen and let them introduce themselves, and then we'll start our discussion. So we'll start with the sheriff's.
Good evening. My name is Mike Zietz. I'm a major at the sheriff's office.
All right. Pastor Holland.
Reverend Vinnie Holland. I'm an associate pastor at First Baptist Church in Warrenton, right across from the library.
Delegate.
Delegate Michael Weber, represent the 18th District, which is 2/3 of Fauquier County, a third of Culpeper, a third of Warren, and all of Rappahannock.
Our Commonwealth Attorney.
My name's Scott Hook. I'm Fauquier County's Commonwealth Attorney, and glad to be back.
All right. Last but not least.
Mike Kotchis, Chief of Police for Town of Warrenton. Great to be here.
All right. Again, thanks everyone for being here. Again, for those who are on social media, throw your comments and your questions out there, and we'll get them answered to the best of our ability. And so I don't expect you to know these laws all by number. Maybe you do. But I will read and I'm going to use the House bill version of most of these. I'm not necessarily going to go to the Senate bills, which actually mirror some of these House bills. But let's talk with the first one is, HB 5029, which is the law enforcement officer failure to intervene in an unlawful use of excessive force. Right? Everyone somewhat familiar with that particular bill there?
Yes, sir.
And so I guess we can start this topic with maybe all of these with Delegate Weber, since he's in the room when these decisions are being made. What was the impetus of this particular bill here?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Well, so a lot of I think the impetus behind this particular bill is over the course of the summer and over the course of time, there have been some instances where a police officer used excessive force where that was unlawful, and a partner or somebody was a bystander in it, and so I think the impetus behind this particular bill, was to provide a penalty for the bystander that was just watching rather than trying to intervene and stop the offender from breaking the law. It was basically, as I understood, part of the bill.
Okay. And then I guess from the Sheriff's Department, how does this change how you guys are doing business? What have you already done to address this, or what do you plan to do to address this?
It really doesn't affect us because most law enforcement in Virginia and most law enforcement officers know what's right and wrong. We are an accredited agency, and part of that is knowing that when we witness bad behavior, we're obligated to take care of that situation and act upon it. So it really doesn't have too much of a bearing on us. We've already demonstrated in the past that we do take care of these types of situations. So it really doesn't impact us because we already know what's right and wrong.
All right. And you mentioned a term there, maybe people don't necessarily understand what law enforcement, and both of our agencies have this accreditation thing. What does that entail?
It means that we have our policies and procedures that are open, they're reviewable, they're public, and we are tested by an independent body and a board that comes in. And I believe it's every 3 or 4 years. I think Chief Kotchis knows a little bit more about it than I do because we are recently accredited. But it basically means that we say what we're going to do. We have a policy to back it up, and we also prove it through independent verification.
Okay.
Chief? Yeah, Keith, that's correct. I think Mike's right on. I'm sorry, Major. I gotta get used to calling Major Z's. I'm Mike. Yeah, it doesn't change much for us either. I mean, like he said, the accreditation does a lot when it comes to accountability. But one of the things we were doing at the police department, and this, Keith and Vinny, through our community action team, we were already writing a duty to intervene policy before the bill was even, I think, introduced, and then anticipating its passage. We were kind of watching it for the verbiage and get everybody involved in it. And recently, the community action team voted on our new general order for the duty to intervene. What we did is we basically attached our complaint form to it because, and I think you guys found this out, Keith, is that when you start digging into these policies, while it's easy to say you're going to intervene or you shall intervene, what does that look like, right? What does that look like if an officer pulls up and thinks he sees an officer acting a certain way that's inappropriate and then intervenes and then finds out, well, it wasn't inappropriate and then someone got away or someone got hurt? So we had to work through all those issues. And then what's the reporting process? We wound up using our complaint form. Basically, if a citizen were to file a complaint, they fill out a specific form. So we've attached that to our duty to intervene policy and set up a process for if an officer feels like there's misconduct or the conduct of an officer is inappropriate, for how that officer is supposed to report it. It's easy for us to say, yes, you must intervene, but we're a policy-driven profession, so you got to spell it out, and that's what we did. As for the bill itself, I think some of the issues, and I'm sure you'll get to this, some of the issues I have with some of the bills that were written around there, they're just really poorly written. And for someone who believes in good governing, I really think it's disappointing to see how some of these bills were written down there. I think if they would have just slowed down a little bit and maybe spoken to some of us who are writing these bills and doing this, it would have been helpful. But where we're at.
All right. I guess for the Commonwealth attorney, this particular bill may not necessarily affect your office too much at this point.
Not my office. We don't have the citizen review panel in the county, so I can't really see how this applies. Although I would expect, and I know this, that if the sheriff's office or town police had a problem with an officer, they're going to be telling me about it. I don't think it needs to be mandatory. That's the only way I can see it coming through. But if there's a problem, like I said, they have no problem coming to my office and reporting if they have an issue that they think's pertinent. So this particular bill doesn't really affect my office.
All right. And Mike, you kind of touched on, excuse me, Chief, you kind of touched on us a little bit about the procedure that you have to go through in the reporting. Because looking at this bill, it says the bill requires a law enforcement officer to report intervention or use of excessive force in accordance with its employing agency's policies for reporting misconduct. And so, Chief, you've already mentioned that you have that in place. But Major, does the Sheriff's Department have the same procedure or policy in place for the deputies?
We do. It's not spelled out specifically to this bill. It's just a general, if a subordinate or a law enforcement officer in our organization has a complaint on another, then there is a process and a procedure for that.
And when these complaints are filed, do citizens have any, insight outside of the community action teams that, your departments are dealing with? Does the general populace have any insight into these as they're going through the process?
Well, I can speak from the police department standpoint. That's a tricky subject because yes and no, I guess, would be the answer. Certain personnel matters or what the discipline of the officer is typically is not public information. But what is public information is the results of the investigation, and we notify them throughout the process as well. That's from a citizen complaint. From an officer complaint, it's similar. Even if another officer complains on one officer complains on another officer, and we do an internal investigation, and that officer is disciplined, the officer who made a complaint does not know what that discipline is.
Okay.
Or advised of the results of the investigation.
And the sheriff's office mirrors that. We have a similar procedure as well. And again, we will notify the complainant if it's a citizen at the conclusion of the investigation. Of course, they know at the beginning because we're taking the complaint from them, but we also tell them the finding, but not the specifics because it is a personnel matter.
Do we have any questions or comments on this topic here, Vinny?
Sorry about that. Not yet, Rev.
All right. So I don't think there's anything else to talk about on that particular bill. So moving on to HB 5055. As law enforcement civilian oversight bodies, localities may establish duties, effective date. And so this one's a little bit longer winded than the previous one. More than happy to read it if I need to, but if you're familiar with it, then we can just begin to discuss it.
Are you gonna go through the same kind of routine? Do you want me to kind of start?
Yes.
This bill was really, really interesting, particularly when you deal with the various areas of law enforcement. So what people don't necessarily realize is you have police departments like the chief, whose primary, at least in my mind, his primary boss is really the town council, and the town manager are the primary overseers of the police department. Whereas you have the sheriff's department, where the primary boss of the sheriff and the lead law enforcement officer in that particular department is the voter. And so, the sheriff has to answer the voter every 4 years. The voters have an opportunity to fire the sheriff if they don't like him, or, in the case of Sheriff Mosier, rehire him. And so when you get into east of here into Loudoun and then into mostly like Fairfax and Arlington, those are police departments, very much like the chief's department, where the elected officials are overseeing the department. And so when you start looking into the civilian oversight, one of the provisions as these bills were coming through, on one of them was that we wanted to exclude the sheriff's department because the voters get to vote every 4 years on that if the sheriff's not doing a good job. But then also the makeup of those civilian oversight committees that are actually going to help provide policy and regulate and all that sort of thing, our police department. And one of the issues that I particularly had, which it's a good thing. You need civilian oversight. Well, I think both our law enforcement and the town and the sheriff have done a good job of bringing in civilians and to bring in the community. I mean, it's community policing efforts, so to speak. They're much more involved in the community, and I think they do a good job of that. One of the issues that I particularly have with this bill is that there were no particular provisions that the oversight committee had to go through a training, go on a ride along, or anything else to really see the other perspective, not just their own perspective, when it comes to some of these issues. So, I mean, that bill, I believe it had good intentions. I just think that it needs to be finessed to make it better.
And so with this,
What's that?
The departments would have the flexibility to set up their own criteria for these oversight bodies, correct?
The local body, the locality.
Right. And so I guess I'll start with Chief this time, because there's something similar already going on in the town of Warrenton.
Yeah, something similar. I mean, like I said, we have the community action team. You know, both you and Vinny are on that, and that goes. You know, we kind of put that together under the idea of, you know, we talk about community engagement, or just taking it the next step further, and, you know, it more like community involvement. You know, and so, you know, it's just getting into and I think it's helped. I know the folks on the committee I know the officers that are there on the committee have actually given it great reviews, in the sense that it's, you know, it opens the eyes of not only the citizens, but our officers who are there, you know, like hearing your point of view, and then you also hearing our point of view, and understanding the complicated nature of developing policies and how they are put into place. So yeah, and what Representative Weber said hits right on the point about this bill. There were several issues with it. Early on, there was an issue. I think it was Delegate Herring submitted it, actually introduced a bill, and it was, again, going back to how some of these bills were written. It was written so poorly. I believe the Police Benevolent Association had to reach out and talk about some basic Garrity issues. And what a Garrity issue is, it's a legal case from years ago that talks about information gleaned from an administrative hearing being used in a criminal hearing, and who would actually be on that panel. It mandated a bunch of different things. Thankfully, a lot of that verbiage was changed, and the bill now is like Representative said, it allows for jurisdictions to choose how they want to go about doing it. So I will say I do have a little bit of experience with citizen review boards, where when I first started my career down in Roanoke City has one. They had one 25 years ago. And the way they built theirs is, in order to be on the board, you had to attend their Citizens Academy and be a graduate of their Citizens Academy. And it seemed to work well. From what I understand, it still goes. But again, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Like most things in law enforcement are not a one-size-fits-all. Every community is different. Every community wants to be policed different. So the bill is the bill. I don't think it's all that bad.
All right, Major.
I really don't have much to add on this one, because as the delegate had already stressed, the sheriff's office was not part of this bill, because the sheriff is reelected every couple of years. I will say that part of the area that we live in, I don't think this is as much of a concern as it is in the Northern Virginia areas or the Tidewater areas. And we do our due diligence of trying to be transparent as we can be with folks. So even if we were to fall under the auspice of some sort of civilian oversight, I don't see where it would hinder our operations or really change too much from what we do now anyway. But because we're not part of that oversight, I'll defer to Chief Gotches.
And I guess what is the scope supposed to be for these oversight? I mean, obviously, well, maybe it's not so obvious. They don't have hire and fire, or more appropriately, fire type authority within these committees. But I mean, what's the scope for those who are too lazy to read? Well, maybe lazy is not the right word. There's a lot of verbiage here, and maybe it's confusing. I won't say lazy. It's confusing. You're reading all of this and not really understanding what the scope of a oversight body is supposed to be.
I can kind of answer that. It really depends on the jurisdiction, the way I read this bill. Every jurisdiction is a little different. For instance, some jurisdictions, the board has an advisory vote, right? So the chief would bring down some type of discipline. It would then go to citizen review board to review that. Other jurisdictions, I think the big issue, and Representative Weber, you correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't a big issue whether they had some type of subpoena power or something like that they were talking about.
Yeah, so when the bill was submitted, it was actually, if I remember correctly, it was actually the locality shall establish these rather than may. They gave investigative policies, practices, and they also allowed them to make disciplinary determinations in cases, among other things. And so the way it started, the not only the subpoena power, but the oversight bodies had to be formed, the locality had to do it to the specifications of the bill. And by the time the bill came all the way through, I think it was less bad in that it was May. They excluded the sheriffs. I know that some of my colleagues in the House really wanted the sheriffs in that department. And again, I think when the bill originally came in, I think a lot of that would have created issues because it would have constrained what our localities are already doing and trying to bring in the community and engage the community in a manner that can be effective.
I'm correct in reading this that this doesn't take effect until July 1, 2021, correct?
I believe so.
Right. So I guess I just throw that out there so that those who are listening in, don't run down to the Warrenton Police Department trying to get on a committee that doesn't necessarily exist to this level yet. So they have until July 1st, 2021 to get to this level.
We're always forward to people to join our community action team, Keith, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But again, that's a subset of what's being talked about in this bill here. So even if you come with the community action team, don't expect this level right off the bat. That's something that we have to grow into.
That's correct.
All right. Anything else? Scott, you have anything to add to it?
No, originally this bill was much more on my radar because it made the Commonwealth's attorney effectively be the general counsel for these boards, which really causes a lot of problems if there actually are officers who are potentially criminally charged and things like that. So they've taken my office out of it. I was also actually kind of concerned about that subpoena power. Most people don't really think anything about it when you hear the word, but there's just some incredible powers attached to being able to command somebody to appear or to command documents to be provided. And in the initial versions of the bill, it seemed to be a bit unchecked. So, I mean, I had a lot of concerns all around, but like I said, my office was removed. I don't know why we were ever put into it, but we're removed and the subpoena power doesn't appear to be there anymore. So this is something, that the Sheriff's Department, the Police Department, much more concerned about than myself.
And Delegate Weber, I mean, are there ongoing discussions with this particular bill that may take effect before July?
I mean, the bill as signed by the governor had that provision that it will not become effective until July 2021. I think primarily the reason would be that essentially we were running so close. The session lasted 85 days. It was longer than our regular session, and we're in November. So most bills that we engage in during session become law that following July 1. And so you don't want necessarily a bill or a new law just coming in, say, March. It's much more poignant to have everything coming into effect at the same time. Okay. However, the bill can change.
Okay. That was the point of the question.
Yeah, the law can change this session. There's already talk. Some folks are really unhappy that the sheriffs were excluded, so there may be a push to put the sheriffs in. There's some other issues that will be probably addressed because when these bills come over, as a bill comes in the House, it comes to the House, and we deal with it. It comes through committee, goes through 3 readings on the floor, and then it goes to the Senate. Then it has to go through the Senate committees. Once it goes to the Senate committees, it goes to the floor. Then it comes back to us if they amend the bill. And then we tell the Senate we either like their amendments or not. And if we like their amendments, we accept them. They go to the governor for a signature, or we kick it back to the Senate, at which point the bill goes into conference. And so what we found this particular special session was bills like this, where they excluded the sheriff, et cetera. There were other delegates that were kind of unhappy with that, and they wanted to see the bill go further. So I think some of those delegates may bring more of those types of things forward this session. We're looking at those as they become more as people drop bills and we're able to look at them. So we're trying to see what's going to be coming this special session in January, or this session in January.
And the state police are involved with this also. They're covered by this also.
I don't think so. This is mostly just the localities and law enforcement.
That's interesting.
Yeah, my reading of the bill is state police are not included. It's just the localities.
The only reason
I keep the state police in check then.
Well, the reason I suspect they're not included is I don't know where you would find. I mean, what community would you go to create that citizen review board? Unless you just it's a state board, maybe. Not sure.
I don't think Richmond has any problem creating boards and other tables to set people.
Good point.
I'm pretty sure the administration's pretty quick on whoever's in office at that time is always pretty quick, particularly when it comes to the state patrol. I would say that the state patrol, along with the Fauquier Sheriff's Department and the Warrenton Town Council, are all accredited agencies. So they, in my mind, already operate at the highest standards that the Commonwealth currently has, according to DCJS. There's, I think, 100 of the 400 law enforcement agencies are accredited. So Fauquier is actually blessed to have the Warrenton Town Council and the Fauquier County Sheriff's Office accredited.
That is very true. I was going to make that statement myself. I don't think we realize how important that is for us to have the two law enforcement agencies most closely involved with us to be accredited, and the standards that they have to meet to even get there. So that in itself, and even when all of this kind of kicked off and we see some of these other things that are happening around the nation, most if not all of those agencies that are involved in those incidents are not accredited. And so it's kind of the wild, wild west in those departments. And unfortunately, when you go unchecked like that, things like that can happen.
Well, if I could, Keith, it's one of the things where we actually looked at. We have actually got a piece of legislation. The phone call that I was trying to take before we did this was actually the chairman of the Militia Police and Public Safety Committee. I have a bill that basically has DCJS give grants to help the other law enforcement agencies become accredited, because the way we looked at it was, okay, let's find the highest standard that we know of and try and bring everybody up to that standard, so that we're all functioning at the best practices, right? You want all your law enforcement trying to do that. And so when I discovered that, only a quarter of the law enforcement agencies across the Commonwealth were accredited, the thought was, let's do what Fauquier County just did and become accredited, because the process is, I think Mike can attest, or the major can attest, it's pretty extensive.
It is. It's a significant process. It's not only the process. I mean, you need somebody to do it. We have an accreditation manager on staff, and that's all she does is manage our accreditation process. We are starting to proceed towards national accreditation through CALIA. Now, there's more of a cost associated with that, but I will tell you the man hours of putting or being accredited is significant, especially when you first started. I give kudos to Sheriff Mosier, because I know he came in and just did that, and it's a significant undertaking.
And to echo what Chief Kochis and Delegate Weber said, it's an ongoing process. It's not just something where you get a certificate and now you're done for the next 3 or 4 years. It's an ongoing process. We just went through another quarterly update, and it is time consuming. So we have folks that are dedicated to doing it, but they also have other jobs and other tasks. So we're getting pretty good about multitasking, but it's worth it, because at the end it gives you reason to be able to stave off some of these bills, and some of these discussions just aren't happening here because we're already checking ourselves and making sure the public's informed, and that's what it's all about.
I mean, and that should be something that anyone who's outside of our locale, you should pay attention to, in your local elections when sheriffs are running. If you hear about sheriffs who are running and they don't want to do accreditation, that should be a red flag for you, that maybe you ought to choose the other guy, because you don't want a department that's not accredited. All right, so we'll move on to the next one unless there's something else on that.
Well, I would just, if I could, just allude. I think so. When you get into some of these, excuse me, some of these other bills, if your law enforcement agency is accredited, they're already following a best management, a best practice for some of this stuff. So for instance, you know, the chokeholds and things like that, they're already not doing these things because it's not. It would be only in an extreme circumstance kind of thing, and that's already a past practice that falls under accreditation. And so the thought behind at least our piece of legislation that we're offering up this year is let's get everybody to that standard already, and take that maybe even further. I mean, you know, the chief just alluded to they're going to national accreditation, which takes it even higher. And I know Virginia State Police is at that level, if not higher. And so by doing that, you're trying to prevent a lot of these instances from happening because you're already in a continuously training mode to have the best practices out there.
Just to add to that, there's also some pretty decent departments out there throughout the Commonwealth that we've worked with that might not be accredited, and it might just simply be what Delegate Weber's trying to help with. It costs money to do these things. So some of these localities, I don't want to take away from a department just because they're not accredited doesn't mean they're not doing the right thing.
Oh, absolutely. I'm just concerned about the one who is not interested in becoming accredited. Benny, we have anything on the social media?
No, there was a question. I guess in the oversight they had in Fauquier County, we're unusual. We have a state barracks right in Warrenton by Walmart. Then we have city police, and we have county. Well, there are times when the state could be involved in something right at the Walmart. And if something was to happen, as you said, what is the review for that? We know Warrenton Police has the review, a citizen review, and Fauquier and the sheriff's has. But what does the state have if something happens on, I guess, the city street? Because they can't just ignore somebody who runs off of 29 and they end up stopping them over there by Taylor Middle School. They're going to carry out the stop, and if something happens, what happens at that point under this legislation?
Well, I can tell you that just from my experience, what I do know is that the Virginia State Police, when they have an incident, like if they have an shooting from this area, that'll be tasked out to a different area, right? Like maybe the Roanoke area or something like that. I also know there's significant review by the Attorney General's office of the Virginia State Police. I'm not sure to what level, but I also know there's a bill that recently passed. Correct if I'm wrong, Delegate Weber, but it Attorney General's office the authority now to investigate law enforcement agencies overall in Virginia, correct?
Yes, I believe you're right.
From the sheriff's office standpoint, to answer that question, we work with the town of Warrenton all the time and the state police. And if we're ever all engaged in an incident that needs some sort of review or oversight, the supervisors from each of those agencies will get together. And generally, we will pass it to the state police because they're an independent body. So it doesn't look like the sheriff's investigating a town and the town's investigating the sheriff, because they do have the resources to bring in folks from other divisions, other parts of the state that don't work with us on a regular basis. And honestly, they have no reason not to be open and transparent with the findings.
I'll add to that Commonwealth attorneys are regularly asked to actually review the actions of, we try to avoid reviewing the actions of our own county, but we review the actions of other counties' law enforcement agencies. That's a pretty common practice. It doesn't necessarily get as much attention, but I can tell you since I've taken office, we've reviewed at least one other, the police department, and actually we're currently under the review of some state police actions from a totally different jurisdiction, and they brought us in for our impartiality because we have no ties to that community.
Okay. And I would throw the plug out there for ride-alongs. They're a great thing. You definitely get to learn a different perspective. And as far as the community action team with the Warrenton Police Department, if you can become an at-large member, just contact the police department and they'll tell you how to apply as an at-large member. Again, it gives you different perspective on how the police do their job. Maybe Delegate Weber, he can invite you down to Richmond and you can sit through a session or two, and then you'll happily keep sending him down there to do it for you because you don't want to sit through that at all.
Yeah, I guarantee that.
Of course, the only way I'm going into a courtroom is if I'm on the jury. So, all right, let's move to the next one. 5058. And this one starts off interesting, but it does roll into a bunch of different things. Marijuana and certain traffic offenses, issuing citations, etc. And I believe this is speaking to what a motorist can be stopped for and what they can't be stopped for, which is different from what it used to be. All right, so we'll once again start off with the delegate.
All right. This bill was actually very interesting in and of itself. So we essentially, I think it was last session or session before last, kind of, I guess, decriminalized small amounts of marijuana. So if you get busted with a little bit, you're not going to get, it's decriminalized. And then, so the idea, hold on.
Sounds like my house.
Yeah, well, the youngest is not cooperating. Typical household. So essentially what happened was, if somebody gets pulled over, the idea was that there are some small infractions that are being used to just pull people over. They wanted to minimize those. The issue that you have is that the bill originally was really poorly written. And so the best example I can give was an officer, as the bill was drafted when it started, an officer couldn't pull over a car in the middle of the night for headlights that weren't working. And that's a pretty big safety issue in the middle of the night. The bill came into the House. We kind of pointed that out. However, some folks just didn't want to hear it, and they passed it. And then it went over to the other side, and they passed it. And it actually took an amendment from the governor to amend the bill so that things like that were put into the bill. Because, so for instance, a brake light. The defective brake light, loud exhaust system, but the way it was written, it'd be both brake lights could be out and you wouldn't get pulled over for it. So, it was a very interesting bill to see come through the General Assembly. For instance, like I said, with the safety issues of the bill, I didn't particularly want to vote for it.
All right, I'll start with the Sheriff's Department. How does this change what you guys are doing?
Well, unfortunately, we're pretty familiar with changes of laws and changes in what we are accustomed to doing. So honestly, the only effect it has is just making sure that we're getting the information to our folks, getting them trained, working with the Commonwealth Attorney's Office. They've been great about doing legal updates with all of our folks. And thankfully, part of the bill was corrected, for lack of a better term, when they first passed it, because it was kind of, I don't know, it didn't sit right with us when we first read it. And we're like, so you mean you can drive around with no headlights on at night and we can't do anything about it, except for reckless driving? So it is going to have a little bit of an effect on vehicle safety and highway safety. It just is. You get somebody driving down the road that's got a headlight out, I mean, it's a safety violation. Yes, it was something we used to be able to stop for, maybe not so much now. Brake lights, they're safety. So it's going to have an impact on safety, and I'd be curious to see what the crash data is in the next couple of years when we go back and look at it. But also the delegate was right on the money. They decriminalized small amounts of marijuana. Part of that bill also took away some of our abilities to do some searches during lawful stops for different odors of marijuana and other items such as that. So that's really going to hinder our ability to get the large amounts of drugs and marijuana that's going up and down the highway, because if we can't use what used to be odor as a reason to search, that's really hindering us. But we'll adapt and overcome, move forward, and do the best we can to try to keep the highways and the folks in the county as safe as we can.
If I could,
Chief?
one of my biggest issues.
One second, Chief.
Sorry.
Yeah.
One of the biggest issues that I actually had with this bill, if I read it correctly, as I understood the bill, was there's a section basically that it says no evidence discovered or obtained as a result of a stop in violation of this subsection, including evidence discovered or obtained with the operator's consent, shall be admissible in any trial, hearing, or other proceeding. And as I read that sentence, it basically says you could have a dead person in the car, and that evidence cannot be used to get in trial in a murder trial, and that just didn't sit well with me.
Yeah, I have some issues with the bill. I think what the legislature was trying to do was prevent pretextual stops, right? Pretextual stops are legal under the law. There's a Supreme Court case. I think it's Wren or Wardlow, one of those two. Scott, correct if I'm wrong. I'm not an attorney. But that basically said pretextual stops are lawful. And like with a lot of things in law enforcement, sometimes we could be our own worst enemy, I think. That being said, the major issue that I had with the bill was, one, the headlights thing. I'm glad that got rectified, at least to some extent. But like inspection stickers, under this bill, you can't be pulled over. I think it's unless the inspection is expired 2 months or something like that, 2 to 3 months. As for the marijuana thing, my issue with what's happening in the legislature with the marijuana is, you decriminalize small amounts, then you come back and you do this stuff with the, odor of marijuana, which, forget the whole DUID if somebody's impaired and driving and evidence of that, right? But you're confusing law enforcement, really. I mean, do one or the other. Legalize it or don't, right? That's not my place to tell me whether you should or shouldn't. But it just seems like there's just lots of little games going on with it. So, yeah, it's going to have an impact on our folks. We are fortunate. We do have a good Commonwealth Attorney's Office who comes in and sits down with us and kind of helps make sense of it all. And like everything else, we'll move on. I think, I wasn't around when Miranda v. Arizona became law, but back then I heard, I thought the whole world was falling apart from what I heard, and we got through it. So.
All right, Scott.
Well, I mean, it is a big change for what we can do. I mean, effectively, it creates an absolute defense. If the officer can't articulate some other reason to pull the person over, I got to agree. I don't know whether it was Mr. Weber who said it, but it's drafted so broadly, no evidence comes in. So, I mean, my review of it would be, that dead body or some other, anything in the car, that's outside of marijuana and all these other things, doesn't come in, So these are the type of things. Unfortunately, in this special session, you saw a lot of stuff get pushed through quickly. And, like Captain, the chief said, change happens, and a lot of times change is for the good. Maybe it's time we reviewed some of these things. I can tell you that in my prior line as a defense attorney, I think when people are getting pulled over, some of these window tint, or a sticker at the top of the windshield, or you get issued a parking pass to put on your mirror for work, but in theory, you drive out of that work parking lot and that little pass now is a reason to get pulled over. Those things were getting abused. And, like the chief said, sometimes law enforcement is its own worst enemy. But this one is far reaching. The smell of marijuana, people get high and drive. I mean, it's a real consideration. It happens. While I was in private practice, I had clients I represented as a prosecutor. Now we've had people that that they're just too high to drive. I mean, we don't have a per se limit yet. I know they're working on it, but that's going to have to be revisited because legalization of marijuana is coming. I wouldn't be surprised if it was here this spring. But what are we going to do then? When you have somebody that gets pulled over, they do have the smell of marijuana. Alcohol is legal too. And if we pull somebody over and they smell like booze, we can get them out of the car. And that's for the safety of the public. So with an inevitable legalization of marijuana comes, what are we going to do in that scenario where the guy smells like marijuana and, we have reason to believe he's under the influence past whatever sort of per se limit we set up. And this actually stops the law enforcement from getting him out, from conducting a search, from my office from prosecuting it. So, I mean, it's a poorly drafted bill, and this whole special session, unfortunately, because there was so much they wanted to do. And I'll be honest, I think there were some political points looking to be won, before the election in November. Hopefully we'll revisit some of these things and clean them up. But yeah, some of the parts of the bill, like I said, don't really offend me because, the guy has that parking pass who needs it to get into his federal parking lot to work, all of a sudden is committing a crime that's going to get him pulled over when he leaves that parking lot that afternoon to drive home. So some of these things don't offend me, but some of these things definitely need to come back and be revisited.
That's interesting. I mean, the things hanging from the mirror, would that include like the handicap sticker? I mean, you're supposed to take that out the window when you're driving?
That, I will say I've never had that specific issue. But dangling objects, unless there's an exclusion to the statute, and I'm not aware of one, it would have previously been a reason to stop somebody.
And that could have pulled me over a lot.
Defense attorney, where there's no way the object obscured their vision at all. These small little parking passes that basically hide behind your mirror, all of a sudden became a problem. One of the I never saw that I always wondered about was actually an Easy Pass. I know a lot of people have their Easy Pass on their license plate now, but there's still the people who put it in the window. Is that an object that obscures your vision? I don't know if there's a specific exception to that, but that was one of the ones I was always waiting to see if that showed up as being used as a reason to stop somebody.
So is being on your cell phone still something you can be stopped for, or is that one of the things that are included in this bill?
That's a new one from what I understand. We just put something out on that. January 1. You can't use any handheld devices. Cannot drive with handheld devices. Okay. In your hands, obviously.
I just wanted to be clear on that one there, because obviously we see a whole lot of people riding around with some sort of device in their hand.
Yeah. We're getting ready to put out a bunch of PSAs from the sheriff's office on that very topic. So tune in. Our PIO should be putting that out here shortly.
Okay. And I wish I could say it was just young people.
You'll see my cell phone up in my window. Just don't pull me there.
As long as it's not dangling from the mirror.
I guess this is my curiosity. We were talking about odors. If you smell somebody who smells like alcohol, we take them out and sobriety test them, right? If you smell somebody who smells like marijuana, you just pat them on the back?
Scott, you want to answer that? Because that's going to be a question you're going to get posed by our officers, I'm assuming, pretty soon.
Well, I mean, the problem with this bill is so far reaching is, one, it doesn't give us the ability to search. But let's say you have the guilty stoner and he feels bad and you say, come on, man, I know you got pot in the car. I can smell it. You reek like it. You're red-eyed. And he goes, okay, it's in my glove box. He just gave you consent to search, He's suffering with a moral quandary. He doesn't want to break the law. So he says, okay, it's in my, and all that's going to happen is a $25 fine. But even in that scenario, no, it says even the fruits of the consent of the search aren't admissible. So I don't know what that was trying to fix. We have this, they teach you right out of the box in law school, the fruit of the poisonous tree. And that goes back to, you can't use an unlawful search to obtain stuff to use against somebody. which makes sense. We don't want law enforcement encouraged to break the law to get evidence. So if you do break the law, you violate the Constitution, generally you're not going to be able to use that evidence. In this scenario, and even under that theory, consent wasn't violating the law because nobody's being, if I let you do it, how can I complain about it? So the only thing I could think in this scenario they were looking to avoid was sort of like a, highly pressured consent or false consent, which seems like that could have been addressed in a different way. Calling it coercion, but like, yeah, if the guy says, yeah, I got it, you can't use it. That's what I come back to. I don't know what, I don't want to pat him on the back, I guess, I don't know. I don't even know if we can give him the $25 fine, but no, you get that guy who, he looks like, Cheech and Chong rolling out of wherever concert or whatever. And if they smell like booze, they're coming out in the car in a heartbeat. They come rolling out and there's, marijuana coming out the windows and they can barely see. You just wave them on, I guess, till they ultimately crash into somebody.
So there's no sobriety test for marijuana in the field. So you just basically, because he's impaired, he's driving under the impaired at least. How does that work?
You would need something else. There's if you have driving behavior or something like that, you could still have someone take field sobriety tests. I think what Scott's saying, though, is that the odor in and of itself isn't going to be enough.
Yeah, absolutely. If they do something else, anything else, if they act like a drunk driver, then we can pull them over. I'm not concerned about that. But, somebody could walk by the chief, just the odor of marijuana just emanating from them, burnt marijuana. He can get in his, chief, watch him get in the car and drive away. And the guy's, probably pretty impaired unless he stumbles or does something else as he's walking to the car. This law seems to prevent us from doing much. Now, if we were to follow him, watch him cross over center line, not come to a complete stop, something else, yeah, we can engage with him. But just the smell, no matter how strong, apparently, does not give you the ability to stop and say, hey, have that interaction, which are permissible for a lot of other reasons that you can stop somebody and have a permissible stop and a consensual search.
Let me ask this question, Delegate Weber. So how much of that was influenced by the possibility of legalizing marijuana and the potential income to the state? Did that weigh in any discussions on how we ended up at marijuana basically being a pass for just about everything?
That's a good question. I don't particularly know. I think when it comes to legalization, it's one of kind of like the chief said. We're at kind of a tipping point where they're walking the line. Decriminalization, small amounts. So if you're a 19-year-old kid and you get caught with a joint, it's not going to be the end of the world. To try to figure out what happens with that, the stops and all that, and it kind of adds up. And I think it's, we've kind of reached a point where either policy-wise, if we legalize it, then we need to figure out exactly how we're going to handle some of those policies, some of the policies that have been alluded to tonight. What happens if somebody is stopped, they're driving impaired? How do we find out, exactly how high are they? Those kinds of things, along with, like you say, the revenue to the state. There have been a number of other states that have handled it. Colorado still has a number of different issues. California has some issues because not only now it's not good enough to just get high. They create other things out of it. But then, like Washington State, when they did it, they were clearly after revenue. They taxed us so bad they still have a black market. And so those policy decisions need to be addressed, particularly with right now in the Commonwealth. I think it's one of those things where Maryland and DC, everybody around us is basically quote unquote nullification against the federal government and legalizing it. We're going to start, particularly in Northern Virginia, it's going to start being an issue. And so I think that policy decision needs to be made. I think the right policy decision needs to be made. So if we are to legalize it, there's going to be a lot of concerns and there's going to be a lot of things that need to be addressed. And you just heard a very small portion of it this evening in regards to what happens with some of these things.
Thank you.
Any other questions from social media?
No, that's it. We're done there.
All right. I think we'll hit 5062, and that'll be it for this evening. And we'll pick this up again probably in the new year. Next week is probably not a good week, given that's Christmas, and the week after that being New Year's week. So we'll pick this up again in the new year. And just to be clear, that particular bill is now in effect. 5058 is currently in effect.
So some of these bills, when they came back from the governor, came back with what's called an emergency clause, which basically says that as soon as the governor signs it, it becomes law.
Okay. All right. So let's do 5062, and this looks like it'll probably be more in the Commonwealth's attorney's bucket, but it's the court authority in criminal cases, prosecutorial discretion to dispose of a criminal case. So what was behind this particular bill, and then we'll get the Commonwealth attorney to chime in on it.
I'm from, and I don't want to cut off Delegate Weber, but I'm actually familiar with where this actually started. And Mike, like I said, I apologize if you want to talk. I will not cut you off. This actually started up in Arlington. They got a new Commonwealth's attorney up there, and it actually was about marijuana too. She was moving to dismiss a case, and the judge, what the judge did was kind of unusual. I guess not unheard of, but the circuit court judges up there started creating local rules that made all of a sudden the prosecution and even the defense counsel submit motions and briefs supporting why they're doing amendments. What justifies it, what their authority is. Basically, so the prosecutor, who's always had discretion in how to prosecute his or her cases, all of a sudden was subservient to the judge. So it was kind of a unique power play. And I think what we have up there was a more progressive prosecutor, a Democrat, and then ran up against some judges who may be more conservative, appointed by conservatives. So it was kind of a power play initially. And we have a Democratic legislature, she went to Richmond, and but I think it was good. What it really did, as far as Commonwealth's attorneys are concerned, it kind of preserved our power. It codified, I guess, our power clearly. So if you have a defense attorney, you have a prosecutor who are willing to work together to come up with some sort of authority and some sort of basically program. Not everybody deserves to be convicted of a crime, even if they're guilty of that crime. There's circumstances that maybe suggest that's not the absolute route. But the beauty of going through the court system is you have a whole lot of hammers. If somebody doesn't do what they're supposed to do, you can drop numerous hammers on them. So this is the legislature backing up ultimately the prosecution, so that we now have the authority. You could have a case. Before, what we ran into is the judge would say, what authority do I have to defer this? And for a while, a couple of years ago, that was one of the questions being proposed to potential judges is, what is your thought on the power of the judge to defer something? And a lot of judges said, well, I think if the prosecution and the defense come up with a plan, that kind of inherently gives the judge the power to defer. But other judges said, unless it's explicitly by code, I don't have the authority to defer. So unless it's a first offender drug offense, trespassing statute, there's a couple of odd different ones. There's I believe one's about prescription fraud. You can defer it out and it becomes a misdemeanor. One of the ones I know that was an issue is a lot of counties wanted to, or at least a lot of prosecutors, is the first time shoplifter. Do we really want to saddle them that one first time with a theft charge that will affect them the rest of their life? Because remember, if you're convicted in Virginia, there was no expungement. So a minor transgression when you're 18, 19 years old to shoplift could really hamstring you, potentially for the rest of your life. So some judges wouldn't mind creating programs. Typically what happened, it became a trespassing charge and got deferred out and dismissed. Other judges said, absolutely not, we're not going to do this. So I think this gives the prosecutor a lot more flexibility. I do like that it requires the prosecution and the defense to agree, though, because the second half of it actually gives the judge some authority to defer things also, at least to put that out there. And if the prosecution doesn't agree, or if, I don't know why a defense attorney counsel will never agree to defer something for dismissal, but it can't let a judge force on a prosecution, but it does give the prosecution and the defense attorney the ability to defer things out. And like I said, you go to a lot of other states, that's pretty common. I can't remember the phrase. Maryland, I'd see a lot of clients out of Maryland, and there was a phrase they would always use, oh, that charge was a certain type of deferral. And in Maryland, it was very broad by code. This, on the other hand, it finally kind of codifies what our power is, clearly states what our power is.
So this is basically the defense and the prosecution coming to some agreement. If XYZ is done, then we can just dismiss this case at a future date.
To an extent. The bill, when it started, was actually much, much broader than the bill that ended up. And it was basically the Commonwealth's attorney can dismiss almost anything at that point. At which point, I think, depending on which Commonwealth's attorney's jurisdiction you ended up with, depending on which crime you committed, it was up to that Commonwealth's attorney to so for instance, in Arlington, when it comes to marijuana statutes, they basically ran on, we're not going to prosecute any marijuana. So, as you start looking at that, okay, so we're getting ready to, the knowledge is kind of, we're getting ready to legalize marijuana. Well, it kind of started with an elected official saying, I'm just not going to prosecute it, or not prosecute the policies that the General Assembly put in place. So I think the end bill was definitely much better than when it started. And for those that were on the other side of the aisle that I pointed out to, who are anti-Second Amendment, I said, well, then come out to I'm not going to put Scott on the platform, but say come out to Southwest, and when the policy is we're going to ban certain firearms, well, on the Southwest, guess what? They're just not going to prosecute those. So it's a two-way street. And so I think the bill that ended was definitely much better than the one that started out. Because I think the elected, there needs to be a balance between not only the Commonwealth's attorney, the prosecution, the defense and their rights, but also then the policy decisions that are made at the legislative level, because we're here to represent the voice of the people. And so I think at the end, it definitely reached a much bigger balance than what it started out to be.
Got a question. Talking about prosecutorial decisions and rights and citizens. The question about sovereign citizens, how does that work into all of these issues we've talked about? Also, when it comes to court or on the road, dealing with sovereign citizens, we've seen a lot of that flaring up more and more with recent things going on.
You want to start, Scott?
Yeah. The sovereign citizen movement is not something I subscribe to. I don't think the authority of the federal government or the state government is in question. A lot of the sovereign citizen is based on some interpretations of the Constitution that I don't think it's the proper interpretation. I think the state has the authority. And also, I will say it seems to be kind of a ambiguous, sometimes I see it seems whatever sovereign doesn't have the power is convenient to whatever the problem is for that person, whether it's the feds don't have the power or the state doesn't have the power. At the end of the day, the police power of the state is pretty clear. It's in our Bill of Rights. That's how important it is. It's one of the first, 10 amendments to be clear. So, yeah, you got to have a driver's license. You don't get to ignore red lights. You got to follow the law. If you break the law, you're in trouble. I've dealt with this. I started dealing with it actually when I was a town prosecutor. And Yeah, I don't subscribe to it. I don't know where it comes from. I don't think it's a proper reading of the Constitution at all. And like I said, it's pretty convenient to whatever that person's sort of ideology is what government they currently have to listen to. So, from
a law enforcement standpoint, from the street, the answer is pretty easy. It doesn't change how we operate. Whether if you're pulled over, whether you say you're a sovereign citizen or anything else, you're going to be treated the same.
So nowadays you hear a lot of conversation about I'm a Moor or of course sovereign citizen, so you hear a lot of people starting to pick up on this because now you're seeing these sensational videos on social media that everybody walks away from the guy when he starts hollering and screaming, I'm a Moor, you don't have the rights to say anything, I'm a sovereign citizen. And so the police gather and 5 or 6 cars come and then they end up just walking away, letting the guy go. I mean, what is this? What are these? How does that work? What's really going on here? Does that make sense? Because we know we're going to face that. It's just trickling down the road. So
I'll kind of try to answer that a little bit. I've had a couple trainings specific to sovereign citizens, and I helped put on one with a gentleman from Fairfax who's probably an expert in this region on it. I think a lot of that is just the stigma with law enforcement these days because there's been so much negativity on the officers. When you have a group of officers allow somebody to act that way and let them walk away, it's almost because it's easier to let them walk away and get by with whatever it is than try to deal with any of the drama or the public perception afterwards if you have to use some level of force on that person. But Chief Koch has hit it right on the head. We're going to enforce the law the same no matter what. It doesn't matter if you say you're a sovereign citizen or anything else. The law is the law, fair and impartial, non-biased policing, professional law enforcement is what we did. The Commonwealth Attorney was right too. In the Commonwealth of Virginia, it's a privilege, not a right to drive. If you don't want to be pulled over and present your driver's license, don't drive. It's very simple, but the law is what the law is, and we're going to enforce it.
Vinny, we haven't had anybody from the Moorish, I think it's the Moorish Society, however they refer to the Moor. I'm actually familiar with them. I worked up in Manhattan for a while, and they would be in Times Square occasionally. But as far as the sovereign citizens, I can tell you, I'd been a couple of years ago now. We had a sovereign citizen. We went through the General District Court. He fought whether he should have a driver's license or not. And I don't know how many times he'd been pulled over for not having a license. He wanted a jury trial, and it was a misdemeanor. So it would have been 7 citizens of Fauquier County absolutely believed he was required to have a driver's license and absolutely believed he could go to jail for not having a driver's license for the 6th or 7th time. They had no problems finding him guilty and jailing him for it because it was so many times, so excessive. So Fauquier County firmly believes that everybody's got to have a driver's license. And I can tell you that I'm a potato, but it doesn't change that I'm not a potato. So whatever they spout. But going to what Major Zeitz, I'm sorry, I referred to him as Captain Zeitz earlier. Sometimes, I think law enforcement does make the better choice by just letting the loudmouth be a loudmouth. But if he's operating a vehicle, it's different. But if he wants to be on the street and yell, he's whatever. Sometimes it's easier to just walk away. I mean, that's how you deal with bullies and loudmouths. You don't give them an audience. And a lot of times those guys are looking to make a scene. They have, somebody willing to videotape, around the corner and make a scene. So I think that's sometimes the best practice is simply let the loudmouth stand on the corner by himself and shout out the moon,
Yeah, I agree.
Now, how is that different than diplomatic immunity?
It's very, very different.
Diplomatic immunity is a real thing, for one.
That's a real thing.
They are citizens of another country.
Yeah. So that comes down to our agreements between the United States and whatever sort of country that we have that will exchange. We'll agree to exchange that their diplomats and family members too. Have that immunity, but we're also going to receive that same level of immunity from when we send our citizens to their country. I think that's something that kind of has to be in place. I'm not saying it's not abused, But I think that's something that has to be in place. If we're going to be sending our citizens to their country and expect that they be free from whatever sort of unique laws they have there, I think we need to be able to offer that same level of comité to the citizens that come here.
There's different levels of immunity too. So just because they're a diplomat doesn't mean we're not going to detain them and take police action. It depends on what level their immunity is. Like some aides might have tags on their car that says diplomat, but it doesn't mean that they have the same level as a general counsel or somebody else from a foreign nation. So we have a procedure as law enforcement we go through. If we have contact with somebody with that immunity, we can go through the Department of State and get that information pretty quickly.
And I will say this from experience: if we do wind up arresting someone who has diplomatic immunity and they're not prosecuted, typically they do face sanctions in their own country that oftentimes are more significant than they would if they were prosecuted in the United States.
I want to go back to something that was said earlier as part of this conversation here. If Commonwealth attorneys just decide that we're not going to prosecute, XYZ offense, from a law enforcement standpoint, do you guys still worry about arresting someone for those, knowing that it's not going to go anywhere?
No. We work with the Commonwealth Attorney's Office. We don't operate in a bubble. I mean, my officers will call the Commonwealth Attorney's Office at sometimes 1, 2 in the morning to consult on a case. But there's two different standards. Police, before we arrest somebody, our standard is, probable cause. But which is on a sliding scale from 0 to 100, it's probably about 40% there. I think we've talked about this in other sessions. But Scott's got to make a determination if he can convict them. You remember, convictions on that sliding scale is 100%, right? Beyond a reasonable doubt. It's a much higher standard than it is to arrest. So I think we understand that as a profession for the most part. And, two different roles.
And from the sheriff's office standpoint, I'll just echo what the chief just said, but if there's a law, we took an oath to enforce it. So generally, if we run into a situation with the law, we do communicate with the Commonwealth Attorney's Office. And we want to make sure that we're consistent, because part of the problem that you have, or at least in my opinion, part of the problem with some of these bad laws and bad actors is you're painting everybody with the same brush, and nobody's really talking to deal with something. So if we think that there's something there that we just can't make the case based on either the way that the law is written or the manner in which we have to provide the information, then we're not going to ignore something that's a violation of law, because we can't. We took an oath to enforce the law. But also the expectation is that we may know that, hey, this is a violation of law, we have to do what we have to do, and the Commonwealth might have to null process it or dismiss it later. We're cognizant of that, but it doesn't change the way that we act or react to a situation.
Okay. Again, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us here this evening. I guess we got through, 3 or 4, and there are probably about 7 to 10 more that we need to go through. But that's fine. We do it in bite-sized chunks so that everyone, can digest what we're talking about, and give people who are listening even after this live event an opportunity to put their comments and questions in this forum that we can bring forward when we come together again. So I'm going to go around the horn again and just give you guys a minute or two to give some final comments, and then we'll break for this evening. We'll start with Major.
Well, first off, thank you for allowing me to have this opportunity. I have not participated in this forum before, so it was kind of new for me, but I like it. Merry Christmas to everybody, or Happy Holidays, depending on what you prefer. And I hope everybody has a safe holiday, and see you in the new year. And thank you again.
Scott?
We'll probably have to have about 10 of these sessions just to get through the special sessions. I don't know. My office, like the Major and the Chief are talking about, my office, one of the jobs Commonwealth Attorney does is give updates to local law enforcement. I think it's about a 3-hour course, maybe 4 hours that we're doing just for the special session, this marathon session that Delegate Weber got to be down there for. So no, but thanks for the opportunity. I think the more that we can engage with the community, the more they realize that law enforcement, they're people too. People who ask us these questions gets the kind of clears the air. One thing actually, the chief and I we had last Wednesday. I was on a forum he provided. Just so everybody's very clear. The jury instruction on defense of property makes it abundantly clear that deadly force is never reasonable. So I just want to put that out there. There might be some confusion in our community about when deadly force is an option to protect your property. 0 times is when it's an option to protect your property. That is the law of the land. I'll leave it there. Absolutely. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays. Good to see you all. Major, Chief, Vinny, Mike Weber, good to see you, buddy. And of course, Pastor Keith, always good to talk to you.
All right, Delegate.
Well, thank you for having me. Like the Major, this is the first time I've done this, so I appreciate it. I also appreciate my fellow panelists to my left, right, and all in the boxes. This is actually how we're going to do session, and how we did our special session was via Zoom call. So it's been an interesting learning curve, learning Zoom. But I will say this: as these things progress and as we have these discussions, you can contact either through you, Keith, or contact my office if there's any questions that the viewers have and they'd like my perspective on it. We're more than happy to give it to us. Just reach out to my office and we will provide an answer. Also, I think Scott is right. This is going to be an ongoing thing because not only are we still digesting what happened in the special session, but I think there's going to be some more things to come. And so those things are also too going to have to be digested. And I think it's good. This is a really good forum, and putting this out there, particularly Facebook Live, for the community to see the discussion and see how law enforcement and Commonwealth's attorneys and the legislature all interact to their interests. And I think this is a very good forum for the citizens to see. So, thank you again for doing this.
And Chief.
Well, yes, it is great to be on there with you guys. Great seeing you, Delegate Weber and Scott and Mike. I'm sorry, I'm not going to call you Major. I'm just going to keep calling you Mike.
I like that. I'm good with it.
I've known you for too long.
That's right.
But no, this is a great conversation to have because what happens in Richmond impacts us directly, and I say it all the time that for us as law enforcement leaders to be involved one way or the other. From a chief, it's a little different than as a sheriff, obviously. Our associations typically will speak for us down there. But, just like anything, it's a tough time, and change happens. It's the only thing that's constant in life, so we'll get through it. And we have great partners here in Fauquier County. I think it's been said several times tonight. We're very fortunate to have 2 excellent law enforcement agencies who work side by side in tandem. So, again, Merry Christmas to all of you, and look forward to the next one.
All right, Pastor Holly.
Yep. First, thank you all for coming on. I think it's, especially with social media, very critical that people hear directly from law enforcement and attorneys the truth about the things that social media make look real. We have the shade tree lawyers are out there and they're winning the battle right now because people are believing everything they hear rather than getting the facts. So forums like this, I think, give people a new confidence, one, in you all, and 2, in that now I'm equipped with the truth. So when I hear it, I can see, through the fog what's really out there and not go get myself in trouble. So thank you all for being willing to expose yourselves and be human and just say, this is the way it is. This is how I deal with it. This is what you need to deal with. I think it's fantastic. And I'm looking forward to more forums like this because the more truth we have, I think it's going to be a little less issues in the community that's going on out there. So thank you again. I wish you all a very, very Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And I hope that all your dreams and wishes for the holiday season come true, and you all stay safe in what you do.
All right. So once again, thanks to everyone for joining us, to our panelists and to those who are joining us on Facebook and YouTube. Again, if you have any comments or questions, please put them, in the comment section there. Pastor Holland and I do go back and review those things, and if we have an answer immediately, we'll give it to you right then. If not, we'll research it and get back to you. If you have any ideas about future forums, things that we haven't discussed so far, please let us know, and we'll try to work it into the rotation. And as everyone has already said, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year to you. Be safe. It's good to see the police on the forum. It's not good to see them walk up to the side of your car. So make sure that you're doing what you need to do. Right? Designated drivers, whatever you need to do. But enjoy the holidays. God bless everyone.